Single, retired, and happier, without a house. What I learned at 68. My name is Harold. I'm 68 years old now, and if someone had told me 20 years ago that I would reach this age, live alone, and have absolutely no desire to own another house, I probably would have laughed. Back then, I thought owning a home was just what responsible adults did. You worked hard, saved your money, bought a house, paid it off, and then spent your retirement years sitting on the porch, feeling proud of what you had built. That was the picture many of us were handed. It seemed so obvious that nobody ever questioned it. But life has a way of teaching lessons that no brochure, financial advisor, or real estate agent can fully explain. A few months ago, I spent an afternoon helping my granddaughter look at homes. She's in her 30s, excited about the future, planning ahead, doing all the things young people do when they believe they have decades stretching out in front of them. I enjoyed every minute of being there with her. We walked through kitchens and living rooms. We looked at backyards and garages. We talked about neighborhoods and schools and property values. And somewhere during that day, while standing in a beautiful house with sunlight pouring through the windows, I had a very clear realization. I was completely finished with owning houses. Not because I was bitter, not because I regretted the homes I had owned before, and certainly not because I thought everyone else should avoid buying one. I simply understood that the life I want now is different from the life I wanted at 45. That sounds obvious, but many people never give themselves permission to admit it. You see, most of us grew up during a time when homeownership was presented as the ultimate proof that we had succeeded. It wasn't just a financial decision. It became a symbol of stability, a symbol of maturity, a symbol of achievement. For many families, the house represented safety itself. My parents talked about their home almost like it was a member of the family. The mortgage being paid off was celebrated like a major victory. The deed was treated as evidence that years of sacrifice had finally paid off. And I carried those beliefs into adulthood. For decades, I assumed that owning property was automatically better than renting. I never stopped to ask whether that assumption was always true. The funny thing about getting older is that you finally start separating what you genuinely believe from what you've simply inherited. At 68, I don't have much interest in inherited assumptions anymore. I care about reality. And the reality is that owning a house when you're older, especially when you're living alone, is very different from owning one when you're raising a family. The advertisements never mention that part. They show beautiful kitchens and happy people smiling in perfectly maintained gardens. What they don't show is the water heater failing on a cold winter night. They don't show the roof leak discovered during a storm. They don't show the endless list of repairs that seem to appear exactly when your savings account is starting to feel comfortable again. When I was younger and married, those responsibilities felt manageable because they were shared. Problems were discussed together. Decisions were made together. Stress was carried together. But later in life, after loss enters your story, after children move away, after life changes shape, something else happens. Every responsibility lands on one pair of shoulders, and those shoulders aren't getting younger. I have spoken with countless older friends over the years who found themselves in exactly that position. One gentleman lost his wife and suddenly discovered that she had quietly managed half the household responsibilities for decades. Another friend downsized into what she thought would be a simple little retirement home, only to discover that maintenance never truly downsizes. The projects simply become different. The fence needs attention. The driveway develops cracks. The plumbing acts up. The insurance premiums rise. The property taxes increase. And while none of these things are dramatic on their own, they accumulate in a way that quietly shapes your daily life. What surprised me most was not the money involved, because over a lifetime you learn to budget and adjust. What surprised me was how much mental space it all takes. Nobody really prepares you for that part. You can plan for repairs, you can plan for expenses, but it is much harder to plan for the steady stream of small concerns that come with being responsible for a property. They don't arrive all at once. They arrive in the background, one thought at a time, and they stay there. When I was younger, I never noticed this weight because I wasn't carrying it alone. There was always someone to share the decisions with, someone to talk things through with at the kitchen table at the end of the day. Problems felt lighter because they were distributed between two people. But life changes. Loss happens. Circumstances shift in ways you don't fully understand until you are living inside them. And at some point, what used to be shared responsibility becomes entirely yours. That is when a house stops feeling like a shared achievement and starts feeling like a private list of obligations that never quite ends. I've known people who went through exactly that transition. One friend of mine, after his wife passed, told me something I never forgot. He said he didn't realize how much she had been quietly managing until she was no longer there to manage it. Another acquaintance moved into what she called her simple retirement home, only to discover that simplicity in size does not necessarily mean simplicity in life. The responsibilities just change shape. Instead of big, overwhelming tasks, you get a constant flow of smaller ones that require attention at inconvenient times. A broken heater in the middle of the night. A roof issue discovered right before the rainy season. A repair estimate that is higher than expected. None of it is catastrophic, but all of it demands attention. And attention is not something that feels unlimited when you are older. That is the part people don't talk about enough. We talk about mortgages and interest rates and property values as if those are the only factors that matter. But there is also something less visible, something that I would call the energy cost of ownership. And that cost becomes more significant as you age. At 68, I understand more clearly than ever that energy is not something you can simply replenish on demand. Money can be managed, saved, and sometimes recovered, but energy is different. You wake up with a certain amount each day, and once it is spent, it is gone. So you begin to think very carefully about what deserves it. I have reached a point where I no longer want unnecessary background noise in my life. And I don't mean literal noise. I mean the constant mental notifications that come with owning something large, fixed, and demanding. Even when nothing is wrong, the house still exists in your awareness. There is always something to check, something to monitor, something to eventually deal with. It may be as simple as remembering an appointment or as small as wondering if the gutters are clear, but it is never completely silent. There is always a low hum of responsibility running underneath everything else. After a lifetime of working, raising a family, and managing all the predictable and unpredictable demands of life, I find myself valuing something different now. I value quiet. Not just physical quiet, but mental quiet. The kind of quiet where your mind is not constantly scanning a checklist of maintenance and obligations. I used to think retirement was about financial freedom, about having enough money so you don't have to work again. But I no longer see it that way. Financial stability matters, of course, but what matters even more is something I would call attention freedom. The freedom to decide what you think about, what you engage with, and what you allow to take up space in your mind. When I look back, I realize that so many years of my life were spent managing things, maintaining things, fixing things, planning around things. And now, in this later stage, I find myself wanting fewer things that require managing. Not because I have become lazy or indifferent, but because I have become more aware of what my time and energy actually cost. There is a kind of clarity that arrives slowly with age. You begin to understand that not everything you once believed to be necessary is actually necessary at all. That is why, when I think about owning a home again at this stage of my life, I no longer feel drawn to it in the way I once did. I understand why it appeals to many people. I understand the sense of permanence, the sense of identity, the feeling of having a place that is truly your own. But I also understand what it quietly asks in return. And for me now, the The exchange no longer feels balanced. What I want is simpler. I want my days to feel open rather than scheduled around obligations. I want to be able to say yes to life without first checking a long list of responsibilities attached to a property. I want the ability to rest without feeling like something in the background still needs attention. That is what has become valuable to me in a way I never would have understood when I was younger. And once you see life from that perspective, it becomes very difficult to go back to the old way of thinking. Continuing from there, the reflection naturally moves toward what this choice has actually given me in daily life, not as theory, but as lived experience. When I finally stepped away from the idea of owning another home, I didn't feel like I was losing something. It felt more like putting down a weight I had carried for a very long time without fully realizing how heavy it had become. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. Of course, it never does at this age, but it became noticeably lighter in a way that is hard to explain unless you have lived both versions of it. My mornings changed first. There was no list waiting for me before I even finished breakfast. No quiet reminders in the back of my mind about things that needed fixing or checking or scheduling. I could simply wake up, sit for a while, and let the day form itself at its own pace. Travel became easier too, not in a dramatic sense, but in a practical one. If I decide to visit my children or take a few weeks somewhere new, I don't have to coordinate maintenance, house sitting, or worry about what might happen while I am away. There is a kind of ease in that which I never appreciated when I was younger, because back then I thought responsibility was something to be proud of at all times, even when it limited me. Now I understand that responsibility is not always a virtue when it starts reducing your ability to actually live. Another thing I noticed is how much more present I became in small moments. When your mind is not constantly divided between what you are doing and what still needs to be done at home, you start noticing things again. Conversations feel clearer. Walks feel longer. Even sitting quietly with a cup of tea feels complete in a way that used to be interrupted by thoughts about chores or repairs. It is not that life becomes exciting every day, but it becomes uninterrupted, and that interruption was something I had underestimated for most of my life. I also found something else, something I did not expect at all, which is a kind of emotional steadiness. There is less background anxiety, not because problems disappear, but because I am no longer tied to a structure that constantly generates new ones for me to manage. When storms come through, literally or figuratively, I no longer feel that instinctive tightening in my chest, wondering what damage I will have to deal with afterward. I just watch them pass. That shift may sound small, but over time it changes the way your entire nervous system experiences the world. Now, I want to be very clear about something, because I have no interest in telling anyone what they should or should not do with their life. Owning a home can be a wonderful decision for the right person in the right situation. I know people who take genuine joy in maintaining a house, in gardening, in improving something over time, in building a place that becomes part of their identity. For them, it is not a burden, it is a source of meaning. And I respect that deeply. But I also know that many people reach retirement and continue following expectations that were never truly questioned. They assume ownership is the default stage of adulthood, even when their circumstances no longer match that assumption. They feel pressure from family, from culture, from old ideas of success that were formed in a completely different era. And I have learned, perhaps too late in life, that the most important decisions are the ones where you pause long enough to ask whether the expectation still belongs to you. For me, the answer became very simple. I do not need permanence in the form of property. I need flexibility. I need quiet. I need the ability to adapt without being anchored to something that constantly demands attention. That realization did not come quickly, but once it arrived, it felt unmistakably right. So when people ask me now what I gave up by not owning a home anymore, I don't answer in terms of what I lost. I answer in terms of what I gained. I gained space in my mind. I gained time in my day. I gained a kind of calm that I did not know I was missing when I was younger. And most importantly, I gained the freedom to let my life be shaped by what I actually want in this stage, not what I was told I should want decades ago. If there is anything I would leave you with, it is simply this. Do not let your decisions be made automatically by tradition alone. At this stage of life, especially in retirement, your time becomes more valuable than your possessions. Your energy becomes more important than appearances. And your peace of mind becomes something you cannot afford to treat lightly. So whatever you choose, whether it is a house, an apartment, renting, or something else entirely, make sure it is truly supporting the life you want to live now, not the life someone once expected you to live. Thank you for spending this time with me today. I appreciate you listening, and I hope your days ahead feel a little lighter, a little clearer, and a little more your own. Take care, and I'll see you again soon.